All right. Hey, we are live, and I will welcome Nelly to the channel. We'll see if anyone pops in for our conversation today. Funny story. Hi, guys. This is Miriam from Product 10 South Florida, and I met Nelly on Clubhouse,
Yay,
everyone's
Clubhouse.
favorite app.
I love Clubhouse.
Me too. I'm meeting so many amazing people there. And you were on the stage talking about your work as a kind of non-technical founder guru, someone who helps startups navigate through that challenge. And being that I am a non-technical founder myself, and you were offering to talk to anyone who needed help with that, I was like, me, please. And then I was like, well, let's do it live so that anyone else who potentially has questions about being a non-technical founder, they can maybe pop in or they can watch us later and stuff.
I love that. Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah. So thanks again for coming on. Do you want to just do a brief introduction, kind of bring us up to speed with who you are, what your work is about?
Sure. So I'm a CTO. I'm a startup tech advisor. I work a lot with non-technical founders. I created a training called TechSpeak for Entrepreneurs, where I teach non-technical entrepreneurs predominantly, but a lot of different types of people take it as well, to the roadmap to actually successfully manage teams and projects, technical teams and projects, without being technical or knowing how to code. The the way that it all started was me just being speaking at different conferences and events across the country and around the world. And maybe because I'm a female CTO, I don't know, I just literally, after every event that I did, I had a huddle of entrepreneurs around me and sharing their horror stories. And like people losing thousands of dollars, $60,000, $80,000, even a startup who lost their seed round of $100,000 simply because they didn't know what they were doing. They were non-technical, all three founders, and they raised some money and they blew through it because, technology mistakes are really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was this, a friend of mine who's a super smart entrepreneur and non-technical, and she got taken advantage of by this woman who pretended to be a developer, potential co-founder. She paid her $60,000 over a year's time, and she calls me up one day and she says, Nelly, I've been working with this woman, and I paid her about $60,000 over the course of the year, and I still don't have anything. Like, I haven't seen anything working. She's seen bits and pieces, but nothing actually working. And she's like, that's not even the worst of it. She says she wants another $20,000 to finish the project. And I went, obviously went and met with this person. And within 2 minutes, I realized that she wasn't a tech person. She was a project manager, and a really bad one. She hired a tech team to build whatever it is that she planned, but she was obviously not doing a good job, and she blew through that money and needed more money to hire another team to fix the problem. And so that was really the catalyst for me. After blaming developers for the longest time, I thought, well, you know what? The more I dug into it, I actually realized that the problem is with the entrepreneur. Because as an entrepreneur, if you're not technical and you don't know the right questions to ask, if you don't know how to communicate properly, it's up to you to spot those red flags when they appear. And if you don't know the process, if you don't know what to look for, then you'll always make mistakes and you'll miss those red flags. And so that's, as a TechSpeak for Entrepreneurs, is really my way of solving that problem and giving the non-technical entrepreneur the tools, everything they need to know to be able to manage the teams, communicate properly, set the right strategy in place so they can deliver their ideas, their tech ideas, on time and on budget, and not lose a ton of money in the process.
I love it, and that I feel so bad for your friend and colleague. What are some of these red flags that we can look out for?
Well, there's so many, right? So my process is 10 steps. And when you don't know what you're doing, you don't know the process, there could be so many opportunities to make a mistake. So for, like I use this analogy of it's like going to a car mechanic without knowing anything about cars.
Right.
You literally will believe everything they will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're working with a dev team or a tech person, whatever they tell you, you'll be like, oh, that sounds good. Yep, that
Right.
is the best way to do it. And oftentimes they'll tell you to custom code everything, which is not always the case. I use lean and agile methodologies, which are all the premise and the philosophy behind all of the 10 steps that I teach are learn early, learn often, and learn cheap. And that's something that a lot of developers don't necessarily embrace because developers are all about writing custom code. And I teach them the opposite way. In fact, the first two steps of my process say don't build anything until you validate and refine your idea. And that those two steps could take you months of some doing your own work and really making sure that your good idea is a painkiller idea. And if you do all of that work up front before you write a line of code, then you're saving so much time and so much money because you know exactly ahead of time whether someone wants your product or not. And then by the time you get to development, everything, like you don't have to go back and forth because you already know that this is what needs to be done.
Totally. That's such an important step. Recently, I had to take my team back to that step because we had completely skipped it. Or not we, I had completely skipped it. And it was quite an humbling team meeting that I had to have with them. I was like, hey guys, by the way, we have done a lot of work and I'm super proud of you, but we need to do this process correctly. So we've got to pause and go back a step to that idea validation and understanding who your customer is and whether they would even pay money for this. Does it solve the problem that you're trying to solve instead of trying to shove that idea or product down their throats?
Yeah, absolutely. Most people build a product and then they go search for the potential market that would use it. And we're doing it the other way. We first find the market, understand what the pain point is, and bake the product to really directly solve their pain points. And when you do that, it does two things. Number one, it allows you to build something that someone wants and is much more willing to pay for that product and actually use it because when they're spending time on the product, they're actually giving time, which is a huge currency in product development. And the second thing that it does that is really, really important is it allows you and informs your marketing message. So you'll know exactly ahead of time how to market with those people because during those one-on-one conversations, they'll actually tell you in their own words how to communicate with other people just like them.
How many people do you think I should talk to?
So you should talk, depending on the product and the space that you're in, I would talk to at least 25 people.
Okay,
If
that's
you
really
are,
doable.
yeah, and if you are in the B2C space, you should try to talk to more people.
Oh.
If you're in the B2B space, fewer is okay, but it really depends on the product. The key here is when you're talking to people, there's two things you need to look out for. Number one is that you're not leading them to your solution.
Right.
That's
Asking
really
open-ended
right.
questions.
Asking open-ended questions and making sure that you are, even when you hear the feedback, that you're not interpreting it in the incorrect way, right? Because sometimes you only hear what you want to hear. And then the second thing is, what was I going to say? I forgot.
The question was about how many people I should talk to.
So you don't want to lead the person and
ask open questions.
Yeah,
hear what I want to hear.
Yeah, I'm gonna remember it. It just completely skipped my mind. There was a really important point I was gonna make, and I totally forgot what it was. But yeah, so you want to be able to ask those questions and then take that feedback and directly bake it into the product.
And that'll make help with the marketing message that I came up with.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, well, that sounds good. So I'm going to talk to my product is definitely B2C, and what we're trying to build is a anonymous. Okay, well, I shouldn't say what we're trying to build because that might not even be what we end up building because through our customer
Exactly. Right.
validation, the problem we're trying to solve is increasing people's mental health. And
Okay.
we're trying to solve the problem that technology doesn't, I don't feel technology really supports our humanity. I feel like people are really good people and people are kind. However, our society structure and technology doesn't support us to show in action our kindness and our good. So I just want to
Okay.
make that a little bit easier. Kind of
Okay.
like, you know, when you're in line at Starbucks and you buy the person, you hear those stories, they buy the coffee for the person behind them and then it starts a trail for the whole day. Like that, but with technology.
Okay, so what specific problem are you going to solve, right? And so that problem
Yeah.
needs to be stated as a hypothesis because every idea in
Okay.
that process is a hypothesis until it's proven right or wrong. So you have some assumptions and what's happening in the market, and that becomes your hypothesis. The first in the beginning, your hypotheses are very broad because you want to learn insights and about the market, and then you start to get closer and closer and closer and narrow them down. And as you start to test some hypotheses, you'll actually learn that there's other things that you might hear that you maybe didn't know about that might become other hypotheses you should be testing. So there's going to be lots of things that you're testing during this process. And the goal is to see a pattern. And so earlier you asked me like how many people you talk to, and then just it just jumped back into my head the point I was going to make. You talk to as many people as you need to until you see patterns.
Gotcha.
Because right, otherwise,
Very good. That's
you
very important.
if you talk to 25 people and you don't see enough patterns, then you need to speak to more. And that's the systematic way of breaking down the conversation and testing everything, all of your assumptions until, by the way, even if when you get into the building process, those are still assumptions because things can change. What I love about the hypothesis-driven product development process is that you're always looking into the market and you're never assume that even when you've proven something to be correct, that it's going to stay correct for the rest of the product development process. Because let's say something changes in the market, something unforeseen like COVID, for example, nobody ever saw that. Right. And then you need to now revise some of your assumptions, maybe. So there are some businesses that really benefited from it, and there are some businesses that needed to pivot completely. And so you're never married to the idea. You're always adjusting to what's happening in the market. You're always adjusting to maybe you figured out that the business model is going to be B2C, and then you try that, and then you realize, well, you know what? From a business sense, that's not making a lot of sense. We're not making enough money. We're not making enough to be able to support the business. And so you pivot maybe into a different demographic, right? So you're constantly testing those things as you're building and as you are evolving your product. Mm-hmm. So it's never, those hypotheses never actually get proven true for forever.
That makes total sense. How much time should it take? Let's say you're not working on it full time. So you need to talk to, let's say, that 25, 50 people. Mm-hmm. Is there a timeline that you should aim for?
So it depends. If you're not working on it full time, it's really hard to say. If you're working on it full time, so that's 3 to 4 hours a day, it takes about a month, or I would say 2 to 4 months. It all depends on how easy for you to get in touch with your potential customers, how good you are at interviewing, because you can batch interviews, and if you're really, really good, you can kind of go through them really quickly. It also really depends on your skill set. So if you're just learning, you're obviously going to be slower. But if for me, it's like second nature to me. I can just knock those interviews out. I already know how to do it. It's just easy for me. So I think experience level is going to contribute to that factor, and also like how much time you dedicate to it. Because if you can find those people very easily and you can schedule them into an interview on a regular basis, then and also fast enough to adjust with your hypotheses, right? Because you can after a batch of people, you might want to revise things for the next batch. So that's really the approach, is that you're constantly evolving even as you're going through this process.
Now, this question here, my next question is, and that makes me feel good actually, that it's like, okay, you can take a month, batch it out. Because everyone in startup is just like, go, 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 traction. I'm like, okay, can we just like all chill for a minute and like go to the beach?
Well, you see, like I think moving fast is important, but moving fast for the sake of moving fast doesn't do anything. It actually slows you down.
Totally.
And so I think being mindful of that is really important. If you slow down a bit and actually do the validation in the long term, it'll benefit you in so many ways and allow you to actually move forward faster later. So, I have to catch myself also. Like sometimes I'll be like, oh, I already know this is going to really resonate with users, even for every feature, like every little feature that goes into my existing product has to go through the validation. Yeah. And it's so tempting to always skip it because you want to move fast and you almost like want to make an assumption that this is going to work.
Yeah.
But when you talk to, the key is like, it's most likely all of your ideas are already there. Like the reason why you think they're good is probably because you're hearing from your other potential customers that yes, this is what I need. But you never should ask people what they need because people don't know what they need, right? You need to understand why they need it. You need to understand what's the reasoning behind it. What's the market saying? All of those things will impact how you're going to implement, what you're going to be using, how you're going to be solving that problem, because it's up to the entrepreneur to figure out what the solution should be, not to the user, right? And so that's the key is really taking that mindset of I'm going to learn as much as possible. I'm going to understand every single nuance as much as I can so that then I can think about this problem and solve it correctly in the best way possible at the moment.
Totally. This is so valuable. Thank you so much for this. Is there a standard set of questions that you should ask in the interview?
So there's no standard. So in my training, I actually provide like the step by step of how to actually conduct these interviews because there's so much to test. A lot of people, read books on the lean startup, and there's other books that are out there on the concept. And I feel like because I actually see them, right? I talk to in conversations with them. They know all the terminology. They know they have a concept of what should happen, but they have never actually taken action. They don't know step by step how it should be done. What should you be testing? What you should be testing first? What's second? And what's the order of things? How should you be asking the questions? How to make sure that you're not leading the user? It is like all of those skill sets are really important to be able to do this properly because you are allocating important, valuable time to it. And so it's important to do it properly because otherwise, like, why are you even doing it? Totally. If you're going to set up the time, and even if you have good intentions, and you're not trained to not lead the user to your solution, which is everybody does because we all love and are so married to the way we think, it's really, really hard to do this and separate yourself from it. But so many people went into this process thinking that they're going to solve one problem. Yeah. But then they heard consistently something completely different, right? And they pivoted even during the interview process and said, well, we're going to solve this problem now. It's very close to what they were originally going to do. But because they were able to refine it right in that process, right? And if you're married to your idea and the way you want to solve it, then you can't actually do that. And so that's the hardest part, is to actually know in what order to do all of these things. The questions, you can devise a question, but again, you have to they're open-ended questions. That's for sure. Like you never want to ask a yes or no questions, but you have to devise the questions specifically for what you're trying to do. And like, I can't give you specific questions to ask because you have to strategically understand what kind of information you want to extract. What are your riskiest assumptions? And then create questions around that. And so in my course, I actually give you kind of examples of what questions you could use, but then you have to take those examples and think through how you can apply it to what it is that you want to test, because that's what you're doing, right? You are testing something unique to whatever it is that you're doing. And so the goal of every single question should be to extract the needs, the problems, the issues, the what people are willing to do, what they're not willing to do, all of those types of things. And then you create questions around that.
Right.
That makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Another question that I have, and I know I only have a few more minutes, should you focus on a specific demographic with your interviews that you do?
That's a great question. So demographic is actually another hypothesis that you're testing. Right. So I have a student who's going through the course right now. I also met him at Clubhouse. And he is in the music industry, and he had this whole notion of how this was going to go. And then, after he understood that, hey, demographic and your target market is actually really important at even determining how much you can charge for your product, right? And so he was actually just being forced to think that way. He came up with a completely new demographic that is in the B2B space that he never thought about. Right. And so initially you're not only trying to figure out the problem, but you're also trying to figure out the business model. You're also trying to figure out all of the risky assumptions that will allow you to exist or not exist. Right. All of those things are hypotheses. And the business model is directly dependent on the type of customer you have. Right. And so if it's a B2C customer, the way you could charge them was going to be very different than the way you could charge a B2B customer. Even if it's a SaaS subscription, right? You can always charge a lot more to a B2B customer. You can even pre-sell a lot easier to a B2B customer. And so you can test. So the idea here is that you can test many different types of audiences and know ahead of time who the key here is to identify your early adopters. Your early adopters are going to be the people who need that solution to the problem so much that they are going to be okay with having a half-baked product, right? Because we're not building everything all at once. We're building a small set like of the minimal viable product first, and then we're refining from there. And so as an early stage startup, you may not have a fully baked product for a long time. And so you are doing this customer development so that you can identify those real pain points that need to go into your MVP. Your MVP will have all of the functionality that solve those pain points, but not all the bells and whistles that are nice to have. And think about Clubhouse, for example. When they launched, they just launched with one, like they had people profiles and the ability to communicate through voice. That's what their core product was. 8 months later, when I joined, so I joined right at the beginning of the year, there was not a way to search for a club. Their name is Clubhouse, right? And they're like, people loved it so much that I saw, like, I was really like amazed. There was websites that were set up where people had club directories outside of Clubhouse, and they were just created by users. But Clubhouse was very focused on solving and improving the experience and the retention on the product for the core features that they had. Everything else they don't care about. They even integrate with third-party tools for communication. Like there's no way to communicate, right? So all of those things they outsource because they want to make sure that they get the core of the product that solves the problem that they're trying to solve first. And that's why I love using that as an example, because they're doing everything that I teach
Yeah.
And so doing those early customer interviews will allow you to understand what is that core problem that I'm solving, so that it will inform exactly what your MVP should be. And your early adopter customers are the ones who would be willing to use a half-baked product, because it still solves some version of their problem in some way. Okay.
Yeah. No, it totally makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We didn't really get to talk too much about like the CTO process, which I know you also do. You help people kind of, if they want to get a CTO, like a stand-in kind of CTO or something like that. Can you just briefly touch on that?
Sure. So I am an outsourced CTO, or some people call it fractional CTO.
Fractional CTO.
So it's a new kind of term, and I've been doing it for a long time, specifically because I work with early stage founders, and oftentimes they don't need a full-time CTO, or they can't afford one. And so they still need high level strategic advice. And so I have very flexible ways that I work with founders to give them that support without having to be their full-time CTO. And so that's the advantage of doing that. I also think, if you ever want to bring a CTO on, well, here's the reality of the situation. When you're in early stages without traction, without any like product on the market, it's going to be really, really hard for you to attract a technical person to join your team, because the technical people who are willing to take a risk on someone on a startup, right, an unproven startup, they're probably already working on their own idea, because they don't need someone else's idea, right? They're working on their own stuff. So your job as an entrepreneur is to convince those other technical people who are not willing to, who have lots of great opportunities. They get paid really good money for doing the work that they do. And so you have to convince them to come join your little startup with an unproven record. They don't know you. And so it's a very risky proposition. So my goal in teaching this a way of attracting talent to your company is by taking action every day. I call that earning a technical co-founder or CTO. So you don't find one, because the chances of you finding someone, unless you already grew up with them, they were in your network and they love you and know you, and like you guys came up with the idea almost together, it's very unlikely to find someone who's just going to be a great fit. And so that early stage of coming up with the idea, doing the validation, building a community around the problem that you're solving, actually doing the marketing ahead of the product, right? All of those things that I've just talked to you about, and investing some of your own money in building the MVP. The key is to get traction as soon as possible.
Right.
Because that changes the conversation from I need you to here's a great opportunity, right? And so you're much more likely to get a yes from a technical co-founder or CTO, depending on who you are looking for, or even an investor. A lot of investors look for the same thing. They want traction to be able to know that you are not just an idea person, that you can get stuff done, and that you're not going to wait for someone to just magically show up at your door and say, here, I'm going to build your product, right? That you believe in your idea enough that you're going to take action no matter what. And that's what the type of mindset that is required to be successful. And so if you follow this learn early, learn often, learn cheap philosophy, you can do it cheaply and inexpensively and move quickly at the same time, because it allows you to really build the core of the product really quickly, onboard those users, and then start to have those conversations. So you should be building your technical network. You should be meeting all these people, but the chances of them saying yes to you early on, like you shouldn't have that expectation, because you're going to be disappointed. The key is to build those relationships so that by the time you have traction, you already can get easy yeses from people, right? Both investors and technical people. So,
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. How can people get in touch with you if they have more questions and they watch this later?
Sure. So I'm Digital Woman everywhere. You just search for me, or Nelly Yusupova. You can find me on all the social media platforms. If you're interested in learning more about TechSpeak, go to techspeak.co. I offer free webinars every week, every Wednesday. So you can sign up to those and learn a little bit more about the things that we talked about today.
Amazing. Thank you, Nelly. I appreciate you, and I see you on Clubhouse. If
Yeah,
there's anything I can do to support you, just let me know.
absolutely. Thank you, Miriam. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.